There's been a nagging suspicion for some time now that movies just aren't as fun as they used to be. The age of grittiness might not have taken over quite as much as it looked it might, but wacky comedies, romantic comedies, and grand theatrical musicals just don't get over at the box office like they used to. Sure, there are exceptions, but they stand out precisely because they're different. For the most part, even films about superhumans in spandex and horrors about unkillable beings tend to err on the side of seriousness. And it's obvious why, of course. Joel Schumacher. I mean, he broke everything by going too silly all those years ago, and now we just can't have nice, silly things. Or can we? Because sometimes films just don't give a damn about what they're supposed to be, and the results, if you go with them anyway, are wonderfully chaotic. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 awesome movies that totally didn't give a damn. Number 10, Fate of the Furious. Some people out there might take your hands and earnestly try to tell you that the 5th Fast and Furious movie is the best one. And while yes, they might technically be right, as it's the moment where the filmmakers got the formula right to map out a deliciously successful future of increasingly bonkers sequels and where The Rock came on board, it was also too sensible by half. The Fate of the Furious, though, which started out with a nonsensical title designed solely as a pun on the letter 8, made up for that in spades, and had a fight scene that included POV shots from an actual baby and ended with a submarine chasing cars. By this point in the franchise, the script itself was just nonsense t-shirt slogans, interspersed with someone growling family, and the story was ripped from a Steven Seagal movie. Because for all that it didn't give a damn, that was the whole point of its success, and hopefully the final 2 movies in the main franchise go even more bonkers. Number 9, Godzilla, King of the Monsters. When Godzilla came back to the big screen, the film succeeded because it used the Jaws mentality of only showing the titular star in fleeting moments up until the grand finale. That allowed them to build a mythology for the creature that helped turn him into a hulking hero. And consequently, you could have been forgiven for expecting the same again from the sequel. But the filmmakers had other plans. Intent on rapidly expanding the Monsterverse, they turned King of the Monsters, an already deliciously Toho-like title that said everything about their intentions, into a Royal Rumble of famous giant creatures. And when you've got that, why would you want something like a good script, fully rounded human characters, or literally anything that normally signifies successful filmmaking to get in the way? None of that really seems important when you have this shot of King Ghidorah in front of a cross to blow your pants straight off. Number 8, Deadpool 2. After shocking the world with the first Deadpool movie and fixing Wade Wilson's image on the big screen after the unpleasantness of X-Men Origins Wolverine, Ryan Reynolds decided he hadn't tasted enough creative freedom. He wanted to go more outrageous and more raunchy, which cost the film director Tim Miller, who fundamentally didn't agree and wanted a more stylized sequel. Realizing Reynolds was the box office banker out of the two, the studio went with his vision, and we can all be incredibly grateful that they did, because the early production friction clearly emboldened him to just make a film that absolutely did not give a single solitary F. On top of breaking the fourth wall and having some of the most tasteless jokes in mainstream cinema, Pool 2 flirted with baby Hitler killing, openly took the piss out of star Ryan Reynolds, and killed off Brad Pitt after about 2 seconds of screen time. And it was all in one big glorious soup of utter naughtiness. Number 7, Cabin in the Woods. To make a spoof movie, you have to have a lot of love for the thing that you're deconstructing. But Cabin in the Woods isn't quite a spoof, and the feelings Joss Whedon had for the genre he chooses to lampoon and celebrate in equal measure went well beyond normal affection. This, rather, is a film so in love with horror that it wants to wring its neck, affectionately, of course. And when it's wrung its neck, it wants to defile the body, affectionately set a pack of hellhounds on it, revive it, and murder it all over again. Trust me, affectionately, like I said. Cabin in the Woods is a fiendishly clever parody, gleefully masturbating over its meta-awareness and pretty much actively mocking its fanbase in the hope that they get in on the joke. And if that isn't enough, it then ends with actual hell monsters destroying the Earth. It was a hell of a gamble, and it remarkably paid off. Number 6, Team America World Police. Trey Parker and Matt Stone had already made a couple of films before turning their hand to puppetry, so they knew a thing or two about what could and what couldn't be put on the big screen. After all, South Park Bigger, Longer and Uncut had been an exercise in goading censors and skewering the culture of censorship, wrapped up in a package that also included Satan and Saddam Hussein in an abusive sexual relationship in hell. They also seemed to realize that they could probably get away with even more if they did it with puppets. So, inspired partly by Thunderbirds being boring as all hell and the ridiculousness of The Day After Tomorrow, the pair went back on their oath to never make a film again and made Team America. And somehow they managed to convince the studio not only that it would work, but that it would fit their agenda to make more low-budget movies for kids and families. Seriously, that's how it got made, and yet the film is about the most offensive, unfamily-friendly film of all time that pushes all sorts of boundaries and gets away with it because of the fundamental dynamic that you just can't complain about puppets seriously. Number 5. Swiss Army Man. Daniel Radcliffe might be the bravest man in the history of cinema. Not content with living off his Harry Potter money or going out and making movies where he never had to step outside of his comfort zone ever again, he dove off the cliff of comfort into the furious sea of discomfort almost immediately. Not only did he get his wand out on stage for Equus, but Radcliffe has systematically gone about making movies that absolutely aren't for Harry Potter fans. And yet they still come flocking. Because even as he picks up new fans through his actual acting ability, Harry Potter never dies, no matter how much you try to change perceptions by adding a bit of grot. Swiss Army Man was the pinnacle of Radcliffe's approach to films, and honestly, any attempt to explain the plot in hindsight descends into a farty farce. And in fact, you'd be forgiven for believing that the movie about a man using another man's flatulent dead body as a multi-tool to escape his desert island was all just a weird dream you had, after taking like loads and loads of mushrooms. Number 4. Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans. Bad Lieutenant, Port of Call, New Orleans didn't care about lots of people's opinions of it, crucially including Abel Ferrara, who famously made the first Bad Lieutenant movie and did not appreciate what Werner Herzog had done with his property. To be fair, that is an understatement, as Ferrara said that he wished the filmmakers would, quote, die in hell, and that, quote, they're all in the same streetcar and it blows up, so no mincing words there then. Port of Call, New Orleans doesn't give a damn on multiple fronts. Firstly, it features an even more bonkers performance by Nick Cage than usual, who seems permanently on the verge of exploding. Secondly, it's made with Herzog's typical commitment to creative bravery and oddness. Thirdly, and arguably most importantly, it also has nothing to do with the original movie. It might as well be called Nick Cage Port of Call, New Orleans for all that it has in common with the first film, which is possibly why Ferrara was so put out. Anyone coming into this movie expecting a reboot, remake, or sequel would have been left utterly baffled. Number 3, Con Air. And from one Nick Cage film to another, and arguably his finest ever movie in fact, which is saying something because by most traditional metrics, Con Air is absolutely terrible. The film is essentially an action exploitation movie, ticking cliché boxes all over the place, including having characters named delightful things like Cameron Poe, Cyrus Grissom, Diamond Dog, and Billy Bedlam. Genuinely, in another universe, it could have been a WWE Studios movie. The Miz would have replaced Cage as Poe, Cyrus the Virus would have been played by Stone Cold, and Big Show would have probably shown up as a giant who eats metal or something. I don't know, I ran out of ideas there. It's impossible to tell whether Con Air is genius or moronic, which is admittedly the crux of its charm. It's like a well-meaning, earnest moron accidentally solving calculus, and you just have to admire the balls on them. Number 2, Independence Day Resurgence. In an attempt to make a good, serious sci-fi as a follow-up to Independence Day, 20th Century Fox and Roland Emmerich accidentally made the biggest budget sci-fi channel parody movie ever made. And the second you realize that it's actually a black comedy farce, you suddenly start to notice that, yep, it's an absolute work of art. Nothing any of the characters say can possibly be taken seriously, so awful is the script. In fact, most of the characters are so boring, you won't even remember them a scene after they appear, and the story is absolutely nonsensical. But about halfway through, Emmerich seems to have realized all of this for himself and gone full Fast and Furious by escalating the insanity. The result is a sci-fi that absolutely gives no dicks, including introducing a sentient Apple iPod out of nowhere at one point, and then teasing a sequel in which Jeff Goldblum would lead a human resistance of about 14 people against the alien homeworld that couldn't ever possibly be made. It is absolutely glorious. Number 1, Hobbs and Shaw. Make no bones about it, Hobbs and Shaw knows exactly what it is. From the very first marketing stage, the Fast and Furious spin-off self-consciously announced itself as no more than a muscle-bound excuse to get The Rock and Jason Statham together, have them flirt a little bit, and spend 2 hours or so proving who has the biggest genitals. And I'm not just talking about that symbolically, by the way, since they do actually talk about it more than once in the movie. The rest of the film's specifics never really mattered, but Universal showed their commitment to the banter by adding in Idris Elba's Black Superman cyborg, a shadowy villain boss in the form of a Charlie's Angels-style intercom voice, something about a virus, and lots of silly stunts. It's just an absolute joy, and even more enjoyable for how little the filmmakers actually care about catering to anyone other than the demographic of people who would get moist at the very idea of The Rock and the Stath sword fighting with their actual penises. On top of a train possibly, maybe while on fire, and maybe with a nuclear warhead detonating above them. And just when you think it's all over after the Russian sequence, suddenly everyone goes to Samoa for an entirely different film, and Roman Reigns shows up to do some wrestling moves and say absolutely not a single word. Inject it into my bones. So that's our list. I want to know what you guys think down in the comments below. Are there any movies I missed off here that absolutely just do not give a damn and you totally love them for it? And while you're down there, could you give us a like, share, subscribe, and head over to whatculture.com for more lists and news like this every single day. Even if you don't though, I've been Josh, thank you for watching, and I'll see you soon. Bye.